Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for tuning in to this edition of FNN Politics and Power. Thank you as always for tuning in. We always appreciate you guys. And as you heard me promise all week, today we do have the one and only Tracie Powell. We'll be talking with her about the importance of, diversity in media and her work in advocacy in the area of journalism. Now, very quickly, just to give you guys a bit of information about Tracie in case you are not quite familiar with her. Now, she is someone who has been in the journalism industry for quite some time. She is someone who is the founder of All Digitocracy, a website about the intersection of media, diversity, and technology. Powell writes about the media and media policy, specifically on issues regarding piracy, media ownership, government transparency, and the business of journalism for the Columbia Journalism Review and other publications. A graduate of Georgetown University Law Center, she lives in Atlanta, Georgia. She has contributed to Pointer, NPR, and Publica, the first nonprofit investigative journalism center in Brazil. Powell is also the co-chair of the National Association of Black Journalists Digital Journalism Task Force. In January of this year, she became the program officer for the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund with the Borealis Philanthropy. So, of course, without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome Tracie Powell. How you doing, Tracie?
Hi, thank you for having me.
No problem. Thank you so much for taking the time. So straight out the gate, given everything we're dealing with, let me start with this question. I've been asking every guest this, but how have you and your family been in light of the pandemic? Like, is everybody safe? Everybody's healthy? How are things?
Yeah, we're hanging in there. I'm so happy to have moved back to Atlanta. This is my hometown, and so I'm surrounded by my sisters and my mom, and yeah, we are all safe and sound. A little affected by a lot of the things that's happening around us right now, as everyone is. But yeah, just blessed. I think that's the best way to sum it up. Blessed and hanging in there.
Awesome. That's good to hear. Glad you guys are safe and okay. Especially like we've heard so many of the stories of folks who have family members who contracted it and folks who've unfortunately lost family members. Like I, for one, lost a distant family member.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, thank you. And she was in the hot spot. She was in New York, so it was like, whew, yeah, it was tough. But also wanted to get your thoughts on, being someone who's in Atlanta. Just wanted to get your thoughts on Georgia's reopening, how you feel that's been going. Are you someone that's been venturing out for our audience? Are you someone that decided to venture back out as soon as Georgia reopened, or are you someone that's more cautious and have chosen to remain safe and inside?
Definitely more cautious. I have those underlying health conditions, right? Like a lot of us do. So, my doctors were very, adamant, you have to be careful. And so we have to, and we as Black people, because we are most impacted by COVID-19, both in terms of cases and deaths, we need to be really, really careful and protect ourselves. We have to look out for ourselves because we won't be around to take care of everybody else if, we get this disease and it takes us out. So yeah, I've been more on the cautious side. I haven't ventured too far from home.
Gotcha. That makes sense. All right, now jumping into, the questions about your incredible career. You've been quite busy. But talk to our audience about your journey into journalism, because I know in a previous, actually with Borealis, when they listed, it seems like they did an interview with you on their website. And one of the things you mentioned with the journalism is that you actually came into it from the business side first before getting into the creative end. So kind of share that journey with our audience.
Yeah, sure. So I majored in publications management, which just means I got a dual degree in journalism and business administration. My mentor professor knew immediately that he wanted me to be on the publishing track. And so the fastest way to publisher, he thought back then, was through circulation and advertising. So I was recruited straight out of college by Knight Ridder newspapers, which I'm dating myself now. And I was a management trainee and I worked on the business side. I fought like heck to get into the newsroom, because that's where I wanted to be, really. When I was in high school, I was on the high school newspaper. I interned at the Atlanta Daily World, which is a Black newspaper here. And so I really I thought my calling was newsrooms, in the newsroom, but little did I know I was preparing myself for exactly where I've ended up. And that's advising publishers on how to grow and sustain their news organizations. So yeah, it's been a long while after I left the circulation and advertising. I was a police reporter, covered cops,
wow,
protests, lots of crime, courts, and then I started covering government in Texas and moved to DC, where I wrote a column for Congressional Quarterly covering Congress. So it just kind of all like flowed, and I started a couple of publications along the way in Dallas. I helped launch Black America Web. That's Tom Trainer. So I was getting all that entrepreneurial experience too, still not knowing exactly where all this is going to take me. But like, God always has a plan, and this is what's his plan for me. And that's how I am now where I am in terms of I'm supporting the ecosystem around small hyperlocal news organizations led by and for people of color.
Got you. And just kind of digging into that, the history, particularly the publications you opened in Dallas. In your 2015 Ignite talk for, the International Women's Media Foundation, you had mentioned, the Eclipse and Dallas Haps actually kind of folded, but you were saying they did too well too fast. So can you unpack that for us? Like, what happened there, and what were the lessons that you were able to take away from that?
So you can grow too fast. We were, and I want to make sure, I didn't launch Eclipse by myself. The publisher was Jimmy Porch, and I was the editor-in-chief. But we had, before hyperlocal was a thing, before entrepreneurial journalism was a thing, like what's typical with Black people, we were already doing it. So, Jimmy was getting money from, this hair products mogul in Dallas, Coma Cottrell, and that's how we launched. We launched it with hair products money, and it was a slick publication. What I did when I came in was I added the editorial depth, the content. We were covered. We were really, reporting really above our weight. We were digging into some really heavy issues in Dallas. I had also been an editor-in-chief of a weekly newspaper in Dallas too. So that's, I was really familiar with the territory. I was immersed in the community. And so when we launched Eclipse, it caught everybody's attention because it was slick and it was nice and it was, heavily edited. I remember recruiting journalists from the Dallas Morning News to report and edit stories for us. But it soon caught fire. Jimmy had a penchant for throwing these lavish parties, and anybody would come to the parties, and that was like for lunch. And whenever we would drop an issue, it's like really, so a big party. He attracted these major models, and they would model in spreads inside the magazine, fashion spreads that were sponsored by, different advertisers. I mean, it was really, really, for us to be in Dallas, this was a magazine that was on par with some of the biggest national magazines out there. In fact, Susan Taylor actually came to Dallas to check out what we were doing on a local level. Donna Richardson, who was at the time Tom Joyner's wife, asked us to start writing for her. She wanted to write a column about exercise and health, and she started doing that. So, I mean, it was some heavy hitting at Eclipse, and we did a really great job. But that's what I mean. It grew way too fast in terms of the circulation, in terms of being able to sustain all of that. And I think also the roles were not clearly defined between the publisher and editor, and there was some overstepping. And because there was some overstepping, that's when I walked. Because as a
Okay.
journalist, we have standards that we have to meet. There's a journalist, a rigor to journalism, good journalism, and I was first and foremost a journalist with the highest ethical standards. And so when the publisher overstepped, I decided to leave. And
Okay.
shortly after then, the magazine folded because
Okay.
you can't sustain a magazine without quality content and
Right.
and editorial independence. So
Right. That makes sense. Got you. Awesome. Thanks for sharing that. We appreciate you. And then just talk about your, you had the John S. Knight Fellowship at Stanford
mm,
University in 2016. And for that project, you were studying how customer targeting techniques for online advertising could be used by newsrooms to
mhm,
target, the appropriate audience or news consumers for what
mhm,
they're trying to do and kind of expand their reach. So just
right.
share with us what your findings were as a result of that fellowship.
So I was really kind of building on the work that I started with All Digitocracy in terms of trying to help journalists understand the digital landscape, the digital media landscape. So that
Hmm.
was work I was doing at CJR, and then in terms of All Digitocracy, really looking at it in terms of through the lens of you know communities of color and
Hmm.
audiences of color, and how do you reach them? Because the industry was really, I recognized early on that the journalism industry was not reaching these marginalized communities.
Right.
I recognized early that the trust was completely eroded or non-existent in the first place. And so my challenge as a Knight Fellow at Stanford was, how do we reach these audiences? And then I quick I you know I quickly adapted and said, wait a minute, it's not just communities of color that don't trust journalism and news media, it's everybody. I mean, it's
Hmm.
nobody trusts journalism. And so I broadened my challenge a little bit, was still with the core at the focus of communities of color, but I broadened it to look at, okay, this is how advertisers and marketers target consumers to sell their products. How
Right.
can we do the same thing in the newsroom, targeting certain communities with our content and getting them to come back for more? So in
Hmm.
other words, how do you convert these casual users into paying subscribers or members? So that what I learned quickly is, it's about data, but it's not just the data.
Okay.
It's the fact that news organizations have no existing relationships with consumers at all, with communities at all. And if you don't have a relationship, you're not going to be able to convert a casual user into a customer. And so I had to, and that was kind of I guess that was eye opening to me and to the rest of the industry, because when putting into that basic context, that relationship, then the challenge became, how do we build these relationships? And it all
Right.
starts
I was
with
gonna ask.
identifying behaviors and needs, right? So you talk to your customers, you listen
Right.
to your customers and find out what's most important to them. What did they wake up thinking this morning that's top of mind? What are they most worried about? And
Hmm.
then you go about the business. And so doing that, all I did is I borrowed from what I learned as a circulation manager, because
Right.
that is exactly what we did. Whenever I went out knocking on doors to sell subscriptions, or if I was at the grocery store with my little table and sign at the grocery store trying to sell subscriptions, I didn't come up to you and say, sign up for this newspaper. I wanted to know, hey, how are you doing? Um, if you had kids, I'm talking to you about your kids. If you guys, I see something in your cart, I'm talking to your cart. I'm finding out what you're most interested in. I'm learning what you're most passionate about, and that's where news organizations and falling down on the job. They continue to fall down on the job in that regard. Um, and so those are the lessons I sought out to start teaching, not just journalists, but news organizations, this is what we're missing. Here is where we are weakest. We don't have relationships and we need to build them. And here's how you go about doing that. So that's what my project became.
And so for a present day publication, is that would that translate more towards doing live events, like community things that are planned by the publication, being a vendor out at existing community events? Like what would that translate to, like present day, in terms of
It
getting out and actually meeting people, getting to know more about
it
them?
it depends on how your audience consumes information. So it could be something as brief as a series of text messages, because your audience are overly represented on mobile platforms or social media platforms, and they're constantly using their phones. Then that's how you reach them, through their phones, through text messaging. Or it could be our audience, especially if you're talking about an audience with people who have English as a second language. They're not writing, they're not reading, they're consuming information, through their ears, verbally. And so that might be a podcast that you create in order to reach that particular audience. A newsletter is a great way to build audience and build connections with people, because it's going straight to their email box. That's why emails are so valuable. But yeah, it could be any of those things or all of those things. I think the most successful news organizations right now are meeting their audiences on multiple platforms, whether it's through websites, podcasts, video like we're doing here, text messaging. So there's just a variety of ways in which consumers now consume information, and we need to be in those places.
Got you. That makes sense. Now, how have fellowships impacted your career? Because the John S. Knight one isn't the only one you've been a part of. And I mean, the most recent one was you being a senior fellow with the Democracy Fund. So talk about the experience of, being involved in journalistic fellowships and how those have impacted your career.
So the Democracy Fund fellow is not a fellowship; it's just a fellows program. So we were there fellows were there to share their expertise in terms of informing the strategy of the organization. So Democracy Fund was founded by Pierre Midyar, the founder of eBay. He's one of those billionaires who wants to impact public discourse, and I think in positive ways. Some may disagree, but I think in positive ways. And so the Democracy Fund was one way in which he decided to do that, and it invests in systems change in terms of journalism, which is powerful within itself. But and some direct funding to journalism organizations. But the others are fellowships. The Public Affairs and Journalism Fellowship at Ohio State University, and the fellowship I had with there's the Political Science Association Fellowship, and of course the John Knight Fellowship at Stanford. All of them, I think, were great. They were terrific learning experiences, especially because you had these cohorts of really, really smart people that you could learn from, and just help you. It was very useful in terms of professional development. It also, I'm a Black girl from the South. We get tagged with certain stereotypes and misconceptions. I can tell you, I work very hard to overcome a lot of those stereotypes and show people what it really means to be a Black girl from the South. You use your charm to your advantage. But these fellowships were affirming in that a lot of them that are helped you to know that you're every bit as good, if not better, than some of the elites. I mean, people from the Washington Post and other places were in my cohort, and so. At one point I always wanted to work for the Washington Post. At some point it changed. I didn't have to work at the Washington Post anymore, but just to know that I'm on par with those folks was really kind of affirming, when, especially when I've always kept one foot in one world and another foot in another world. In other words, I've always kept one foot in the Black press, and then the other
Gotcha.
foot, and then the other foot in like white dominated press, news organizations. I've always done that my entire life. I don't know why I did that, but I just knew I needed both. And so when people see, again, you come from, they see Georgia as the South, rural, slow. And I actually had an editor tell me this before. You have 3 strikes against you. You are from the South, you're a Black woman, and you're overweight. And so
Wow.
I had an editor tell me that, and he was like, people are going to perceive you a certain way because of all of that. They want to do investigative journalism, and it was like, he was telling me, if you want to do investigative journalism, you need to lose weight. I was already doing investigative journalism, so that, it's just, again, crazy. But those were some of the things I had to fight along the way to get to where I am now. And so, yeah, being at Stanford, and Stanford is this beautiful mecca of intellectualism, and I was smack dab in the middle of it. And I was just like, it was just really, it was affirming in a lot of ways. And in terms of professional development, it was really, really rewarding. And Stanford is just a beautiful place anyway. I got there, and I had never desired to live in California, but when I got there, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm never leaving here again. But it's too
Had to come back
expensive.
home.
It's too expensive, and I couldn't justify, I spending the kind of money that's living in California. I just couldn't justify it. It was, the housing market alone is crazy.
Right, right. So now talk a little bit about your fierce advocacy for diversity in media. You touched on it some a little bit, especially with the with the comment the editor told you. But like what set you on that path to really say, you know what, like this is what I'm gonna work towards. Like this is what I'm gonna dedicate my career to. Talk about that.
That's interesting. I think that I always, I told you, I said that I interned at the Atlanta Daily World.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at the Atlanta Daily World, one of the things that was drilled into me, that was taught to me, so fortunate to work with Mr. Scott. He said, your job is to give voice to the voiceless. That's what he said back then, to give voice to the voiceless.
Wow.
Always make sure you represent your people. Always make sure their voices are heard. Always raise up their issues. And he also said, he taught me this phrase that has stuck with me. It is our job as journalists to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable. And so
Wow.
that is the charge that he left with me. And so I took that with me. One of the reasons I fought so hard to leave the business side, and it was a fight, to leave the business side and go back into the newsroom, is because I did not see those voices, those Black voices, elevated or reflected or represented in the newsroom. And so the company I worked for at the time didn't want me to leave. They didn't want me to leave circulation. And I wound up leaving that company and then getting a job. Finally, it took me a while to get a job in the newsroom. And it was because the newsrooms across the country were highly skeptical of people on the business side. They thought the people on the business side needed to stay on the business side. They didn't need to come over there interfering on what happened in the newsroom. I felt like I brought the expertise that I had learned. I had experienced and took part in all these conversations out in the communities as a circulation manager. I wanted to bring those conversations and bring those issues into the newsroom myself. And I knew nobody could cover it like I could cover it because I had the relationships, right? I had the connections. So I wanted to lift all that up and take it into the newsroom. And I finally got an opportunity when I got a job at the Augusta Chronicle as a general assignment reporter and then a police reporter. But yeah, there's not a one moment in time that I can choose or pick out this, this is when I decided to dedicate myself to inclusion and representation. I don't use the term diversity. That term is
inclusion.
Not in my personal vocabulary because, quite frankly, people don't really know what diversity means. I think it's been overused and diluted by other folks. So I prefer to think of it in terms of our news organizations. Our content needs to be reflective of the communities we serve. They need to be representative of the communities we serve. And we live in a very, especially if you live in the South, you live in very mixed communities and so forth. The cities are very mixed. You have people from all over the world who live here in Atlanta. And so our content and our news pages or web news sites needs to be reflective and representative of that. And unfortunately, all too often, our platforms are not reflective of the communities we say we serve.
Yeah. And talk a little bit about your work with All Digitocracy, the company that you founded and what you've been able to do.
So All Digitocracy started out as a website. We actually were holding media companies accountable for some of their coverage. And, whether it was NPR or a newspaper, we would call up editors and journalists and talk to them and question them about the decisions they made and why they made the decisions they made in terms of coverage. And we would talk about that and either post it on our site or go on Twitter. We would have tweet chats and so forth to help people better understand how journalism worked. But we also wanted these journalists and these news organizations to hear the communities. So I was trying to create I was forcing a conversation between the organizations and the community. So I shouldn't say forced. I was bringing about a conversation, facilitating the conversation between these two. And so eventually funders started knocking on the door. They wanted to give me money. And I was like, what? Wait a minute. And so it turned into a business. And pretty soon that business turned into a consultancy because news organizations started inviting me in and wanting me to help them reach audiences and teach them how to build community. Journalism associations were doing that. And so yeah, it turned into a consultancy, and it's still a consultancy. It's just that now other people have to run the show because I'm over here at Borealis and I can't do both of them at the same time. But yeah, it's still in existence, but it's more of a consultancy than a website.
Got you. Yeah, and I was going to ask in a follow up about that. Okay, because those are like two very, very, very high responsibility roles. So I was like, it's like, are you juggling both? Like, how would you? Yeah.
No, we still get calls about work and consulting, and I have to put someone else on that because I have Borealis on, and I can't. It's just really, really difficult to, like you said, it's both very demanding to do both.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we're going to get into your conversation about Borealis in a little bit. But ladies and gentlemen, stay tuned. We're going to take one quick commercial break. We'll be right back, okay? Stay tuned.
At Duke Energy, we deliver electricity and so much more, like free home energy assessments, rebates for energy-saving improvements, payment options to help you better manage your budget, and even bill credits for helping the community use less energy. So no matter what you're doing, we can help you make better energy choices every day. It's just another way we bring power to your life. How much can you save?
All right, guys, welcome back. Thanks for sticking with us. So we're back with Tracie Powell. Tracie, can I talk about your current role now as the program officer for the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund with Borealis?
Sure. So I started in January. Shorthand, we call it REG, the Racial Equity in Journalism Fund. I know it's a mouthful, but there are several funders came to the table.
Mm-hmm.
Ford and Democracy Fund among them. And they said they wanted to figure out a way to better support people of color-led news organizations. And so I was part of those early conversations in terms of, before the fund was even started, I was part of those conversations. How do we ensure that dollars are getting to those on the front lines serving these communities? And so several donors or funders got together and said, let's create a fund. And that's exactly what they did. More and more news organizations are relying on nonprofit dollars to support and sustain their news organizations, because as advertising dollars dry up, news organizations are having to figure out and identify other revenue streams. Nonprofit dollars are just one stream. And so a lot of that money was going to white-led organizations, quite frankly. The biggest being ProPublica. Not that they don't deserve it, because ProPublica does a lot of great work, but a lot of that money was being directed at these larger organizations, and it wasn't finding its way down to hyperlocal news publishers, especially those who serve communities of color. As we currently see in the age of COVID-19, in the age of George Floyd, the communities most impacted by a lot of the news events happening around us right now are communities of color. And those communities, as I mentioned earlier, have very little, if any, trust with news organizations. And so they do, however, have relationships with the people of color-led news organizations serving their communities. That's where the trust is. That's where the relationship is. That's where the brand loyalty is. And so if funders want to impact, whether you are a public health agency needing to get information in front of the hardest hit demographic group of COVID-19, or if you are a bank wanting to get a new customer, we are the population that's growing. We will be the majority population, people of color. In some places, we already are the majority population. And so advertisers, media companies, people recognize that the traditional channels of reaching those communities are not effective or as effective as they could be. And so, and if you want to reach those communities, you need to go where they are. And where they are they're consuming information from, a number of sources, whether that's Push Black, which is a huge digital media platform that targets African Americans, Pulso, huge digital media platform that targets young Latinx, or, older middle-class folks who still read the Amsterdam News or the Atlanta Voice. They too have some younger viewers and consumers too, but I mean, they are legacy news organizations that have been around for 130 years, if not longer. And people have established relationships with them. They have brand loyalty. And so if you want to get information out to the people that's trusted, then you go to those people who have the loyalty and the relationships already in existence and better support the work that they're doing. And so that's what the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund does. That's our whole mission, is to support people of color-led organizations and organizations serving marginalized communities, whether that's LGBTQ, working poor. I mean, these are the communities that need information most.
Right. Got you. I mean, based on your study of journalism, just to follow up on what you're sharing, for the companies that are legacy companies that have been around for a century or more, what have you seen has been their sort of that connection to develop the brand loyalty? in terms of that whole involvement in the community? Like,
Well, how
what do
have they done that?
Yeah. Have you
Yeah,
seen?
they are of the community. They're in the community. A lot of these other white-led and white-dominated news organizations are they're not seen as part of the community. They're seen as distant. They're somewhere out there.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas you have the Atlanta Voice, or the Amsterdam News, or again, even these digital platforms, even FNN. I mean, you have a specific following. People trust what you share with them. They know that you're giving them the whole truth, the whole story. You don't always get that from white-led media, but you do get that from the Black press and Hispanic press. Again, that's their entire mission. To represent the issues that are important to those communities, to be reflective of those communities, to help those communities live better lives, to help them see positive images, to just it's in our DNA. It's in our, and I think that's one reason I always kept one foot in that world and another foot in the other world, because I recognized that early on. I may not have been able to articulate it back then, but I recognized that they had the cachet with the community. The Black press did, and the Hispanic press. And so, if I could tell you, they may not have the some of the money or the staffs, the size that some of the white-led organizations have. But if the white-led organizations could borrow anything, if they could take anything from the Black press and Hispanic press, it would be that kind of like that brand loyalty and the relationships, the valuable relationships that those organizations have with communities they serve and the audiences they serve. That's what the white-led news organizations are trying to do right now, and they're having a dickens of a time trying to do it, because they just can't figure it out. And I'm like, they got the secret sauce over there. Maybe go collaborate with some of these Black and Hispanic news organizations so they can help you figure it out.
Right. You actually just jogged my memory. There was a panel discussion that you were a part of, not as a panel speaker, but it was I think it was with the NABJ, the task force that you're a part of. You had Ezra Klein with Vox and a couple other panelists. And one of the things that Ezra was talking about was that, like, not so much for some folks in the media, it may not necessarily be that they need to form their own outlets, but perhaps form something within a larger media corporation that lends itself to being a plug into a specific niche or community. Right. So is that kind of similar to what you're talking about, like what they're trying to do now, like what the larger corporations are trying to do?
I think they've some are still doing that. Even some of the big public radio stations are buying these smaller news organizations.
There's
like Chicago, is it Chicagoist or LAist or something like that? They are buying these smaller news organizations, hoping to reach parts of a community they don't have access to. Here's the thing, and that's great, but they also unfortunately try to remake some of these organizations into their own image.
Exactly.
And that is where they run askew, I think. No, you don't need to remake them in your image, because your image is already having trouble over there. So why would you repeat the same mistakes? Don't do that. You should trust them to do and continue to do the kind of journalism that they do. They know what works best with the people they serve, with the communities they serve. So invest in that. Don't try to Bigfoot. I would think. I mean, it's just never helpful. And once the word gets out that they're part of that this organization, smaller organization, is now part of this larger conglomerate, that culture seeps down. What I would prefer, what I think should happen, is you let them impact your culture and help to change your culture, because that's the culture that needs changing. That kind of dominant white focused, white centered culture. That is what needs changing in order for us. How they are not going to be able to reach these communities of color, who will soon be the majority. If they're not doing it now, it's never going to happen. So instead of trying to change to make these other smaller organizations, these POC-led organizations, look and sound more like, when I say us, I mean white folks, white-led organizations. Instead of trying to make them sound more and look more like that, flip it. Those white-led organizations need to look increasingly more like those POC-led organizations and the communities.
Got you. So given your drive and so, the hard work that you've done in this area, kind of holding media accountable through all digitocracy, all the different journalism fellowships, all that experience, recently you were recognized by the MMCA as an unsung hero. How did that feel to you? What was that experience like, being notified about that?
Yeah, that was a great honor. I was like, wow, there is something about being recognized and being seen, right? That's all we all want, is to be seen. And that was affirming, to be seen and to be recognized by, my own people. That was incredible. So yeah, it's special, and I really appreciate and thank them for that.
Awesome. You were saying like you're kind of learning a little bit more about them as well. And for our viewers, those letters do mean something. So I'll break it down to you. It is called the Multicultural Media Correspondents Association. So I mean, from what you've understood, from what you've learned about them, you can share that with our audience a little bit. I know you're still in the process of learning.
Yeah. So I know that they are highly connected. And one of the things that I really like about them, or the work that they're doing right now, is trying to steer. So journalism is increasingly viewed as a public utility. So just like your gas, your electricity, news is a utility in the same way. And so MMCA is tapped into talking with lawmakers, congressional leaders, and getting them to see that news media is a utility, and that needs to be supported with public dollars, in much the same way as public radio is. Especially these hyper-local news organizations are the same type of businesses, essential services, if you will, in the communities. So that's one of the things I'm really interested, the work that they're doing, that I'm really interested in.
Awesome. And, congrats again on that recognition.
Thank you.
For sure. We talked a little bit about that community connection. What have you seen as the most common pain point for the minority-owned news outlets that are trying to grow or scale? Like, have you seen that it's mostly that community connection that they're missing, or is it more so on the lines of funding? Like, what has been the most common pain point for them that's stopping their growth?
Most businesses, period, led by people of color, are under-resourced. And so it's the same story in terms of people of color-led news organizations. They're under-resourced. And us, if you're a person of color, you always make some way out of no way. And we're so used to doing that, making a way out of no way, that we're perpetually bootstrapping instead of investing in the business to grow it. And so that's one of the things that we do at the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund. We are tasked with helping these news organizations grow and become more sustainable. Running a one-person or two-person organization is not sustainable if you're a news organization. It just isn't. And so most of the organizations that we fund are employ 5 employees, or 5 or fewer employees. And so, it's our mission to help them in terms of capacity building, so that providing money so that they could add the resources and the capacity to continue doing this work.
Got you. That makes sense. And then, of course, with the grant funding, they're able to kind of get a little more operating funding to be able to expand their operation and to bring on more staff, so that it's a little more streamlined.
Right. So whether it's adding technology, paying for new CMS or subscribing to StreamYard, because that costs money. That helps. The money can go towards that, and then also, like as you mentioned, hiring. If you prefer to be on air, you need someone to go out and sell advertising and sponsorship. So hiring an advertising salesperson to do that, or a development director to bring in some grant dollars or sponsorship dollars around some of the work that you do, or hiring an engagement editor or an events manager to bring in revenue that way. But yeah, always with our eye towards teaching people how to fish, so that they can bring in or generate their own revenue.
Right.
And build their businesses.
Makes sense. And then one other thing I did want to touch on, or kind of go back to, you had previously talked about, the criticism that you got, from the editor in terms of whether or not your career would be sustainable. But I'm going to play this one clip. This was a story that you had shared about a previous experience that, in this case was a kind of a racist one. But once we play the clip, I'd like you to talk a little bit about.
Other one was racist too. Don't.
Right.
Racist and sexist and everything else.
Everything was mashed together in that one. But yeah, in this one, after we play the clip, I'd love for you to talk about how minorities will be able to kind of overcome that sort of, incidences of harassment or just overall ignorance. Let's keep it real. Like when you boil it down, it comes down to ignorance. So ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to play this one quick clip. Tracie's sharing an important story here. So take a listen.
You don't have to be in a conflict zone in order to experience sexual violence or sexual harassment. It can happen right in your own newsroom. It can happen when you're out covering a story. One of my experiences was actually when I covered a story, and I had a local official invite me to go coon hunting with him, and I didn't know what that was. Black people in the past were referred to as coons, and when they took blacks out coon hunting, that was really them lynching black people. And so that was a threat, and I didn't even realize I was being threatened at the time. It wasn't until I went back into my newsroom and I talked to my editor asking him what should I take on the coon hunting trip, and he got really, really angry. I think he went and had a conversation with that official. But I still had to cover the beat. I don't know if anything more than a conversation happened. I still had to do my job. And so there was nothing that really happened as a result of that, other than my editor getting angry and talking to the publisher and then the city.
Yeah, that was an interesting story, particularly since you said like you still had to go right back to your beat, like the show had to go on essentially,
right.
For lack of a better way to put it. So I mean, what advice would you have for folks who are dealing with that? Obviously, it looks different these days.
Yeah.
But talk a little bit about what folks can do to strengthen themselves, help one another out, especially with the issues going on with the protests and media coverage with the protests and how they're being treated out there. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. Things have changed, but yet they remain the same. And Black journalists are increasingly under attack. They are being targeted. We have a president of the United States who makes sport out of targeting journalists, particularly women journalists of color. And so that is discouraging. It's draining. It's harmful. It's violent. We just had a Black journalist arrested by police as he was covering a protest, and he did everything right. He was trying to stay out of their way. He asked them where they wanted him to stand, and they still bypassed his white colleagues who were covering the story, bypassed them, and arrested him. That scenario has been repeated throughout these protests where Black journalists are concerned. I have several stories that have come to me about Black journalists being targeted and harassed by local authorities, police in this case. In my case, it was a sitting sitting city attorney back in the day. But it's the same thing is happening, and it's harmful. It does something to you psychologically, mentally. It's tiring, it's draining. And what I say to those journalists is what I said in that clip. We have a job to do. We keep moving, we keep pushing, we do the work. But at the same time, we have to take care of ourselves. We have to make sure we're taking mental health days or time away. We have to do our breathing exercises. We have to walk away. We have to tune out. And that's really hard to tell a journalist. It's to tune out the news, cut off the news. I've been doing that myself lately. I have to turn it off, disconnect, get a book, go for a walk, play with your kids, something to decompress. And if it gets so bad, talk to somebody. Right now it's difficult because we're all, a lot of people are not going into the office. They are having to isolate and work out of the house or out covering the protests, and they are not really around their colleagues. So I would say pick up a phone and talk to your colleagues. Have a lunch break with your colleagues via Zoom or something, or socially distanced at the park or somewhere. But you need to do that. And again, if it gets so bad that you need to talk to somebody, really, there's nothing wrong with talking to a therapist at all. But again, we have to do the work. And if I had to do it all over again with what happened with that city attorney, I should have reported the heck out of that. I should have written about that. Whether it was a first person essay, and I don't know if that opportunity was never given to me, but if I had to do it all over again, I would have written about that experience and I would have reported the heck out of it.
Wow.
And because he should have been removed from office. That's what should have happened. He should have been removed. But again, God has a way of working things out, because he died a painful death. He died of cancer. I don't wish that on anybody. Don't wish any of that. But when that's what happened. I went back and looked him up to see whatever happened to Jim Walls. And so that's what happened. He passed away from cancer. But yeah, I should have written about that. So yeah, we do have, we never want to become the news. We report on other people's news. We are not the news. But in that instance, and I think that might be a little bit about what's different today, is maybe today, if it happened current day, it would get reported.
That's true.
And that person hopefully would be removed from that position of authority.
That's true, particularly with social media. Like even if it's never formally reported, like in the publication itself, that person would have posted, tweeted, took a selfie, something. It would have been a quick video, like
exactly,
for sure. And that would have gone viral. Yeah, that story would have gone viral if it in modern day. That for sure.
I think you're right. I agree with you.
Absolutely. So in a slight bit of transition, I noticed you recently, speaking of social media, you recently shared a friend of yours that had passed away, a colleague that you worked with back in Dallas. And you were mentioning you had watched her blossom into a leader in her own right. I believe she kind of rose up the ranks to become an editor. So I just wanted you to talk a little bit about the importance of mentorship in news media, like folks collaborating together within the newsroom and helping the newer ones come up. Kind of talk about the significance of that, and who were your mentors when you were coming up?
Oh wow. Oh, so mentoring is very important. We have to look back and bring up others behind us. I mean, that's what happened with me. I think Ruth came to me. I don't know that she finished college, but I know she did go to college. But I don't know if she finished, and she had to come back home to care for her mother. I remember her mom being sick. And she came to my newsroom. I was an editor in Dallas, and said she wanted to report. She wanted to cover her community. And I was, at first I was like, you always have people coming in there saying they want to write. And I was like, do you understand what writing is? This is not writing poetry. This is reporting, which is, both are difficult, both are relevant, but one is, actually going out there reporting and getting information and knowing how to get to the information. So I was like, we had that conversation about the difference in news writing and reporting and other types of writing. And so she said, no, I want to cover my community. And so that's exactly what she did. And she actually became an editor of the North Dallas Gazette. She was editor in chief when she passed away. And so she did very well. And I'm proud of Ruth. I didn't realize at the time, until I saw her obit that she was actually older than me. And so it's just amazing in a lot of ways. She mentored me as much as I mentored her. And I wish I had been able to tell her that before she passed away from COVID-19. But yeah, mentoring is very, very important. I remember when I was in the newsrooms, really looking hard for mentors, and there were fewer of them around and fewer of them available. And now that I look back, it was just as difficult for them because they were one or two in these positions where Black folks had never been before. And so they were having to look around and cover their own butts and worried about their own ability to remain where they were. But it was difficult to find a mentor when I first started out because there were so few people of color inside newsrooms. I guess there's just as few now, actually, because there have been so many layoffs and so forth. But what I've learned is mentoring happens both ways. I can honestly say that the people who call me a mentor, I've learned just as much from them. So just being open to learning more. I mean, I have grant partners right now, people that I'm funding who are doing some incredible work. And I'm learning from it. I'm learning from how they're covering these protests in such interesting and creative ways, even if it's just a matter of, in terms of tweet threads that people all over the world are following. So to me, that's mentorship. So I'm a strong proponent of mentoring, but also understanding that there's also reverse mentoring, and it's really needed. And when we talk about the D word, diversity, in these white-led news organizations, I tell them all the time because they always want to start some kind of mentoring program. I said, well, make sure it's also a reverse mentoring component to it, because you have as much to learn from people of color as they do from you. So, who are my mentors? I don't know if we have that kind of time. I have so many people that I learn from and grow from every day. A lot of folks. I don't want to leave people out, so I won't start naming names. But trust me, I have an incredible roster.
Got you.
Yeah, my bench is deep.
That's good. That's a blessing. All right, so we're gonna take one more very brief commercial break, y'all, and then we're gonna kind of round things out with kind of your vision of a way forward, Tracie. We're gonna talk a little bit about that when we come back from this quick break. Everybody that's watching, stay tuned. It's gonna be real brief.
We wanted to move back home to be closer to his family. We decided to go with pods because things were stressful enough.
We weren't sure how long we were going to need storage for, so we needed something that was flexible, and then they can deliver the container to wherever we move to.
We haven't found the perfect house yet, but we're still looking.
As promised, really brief. So we're back with Tracie Powell. And Tracie, just to kind of wrap us up, I wanted to get your thoughts on, you touched on it before in terms of, we still have work to do as news media going forward, in the wake of George Floyd's death. But what are some practical steps you feel that we can do as members of the media, or even just as American citizens, like people who feel the outrage, or even globally? Like, what are some practical things that you feel people can do to move forward in light of what's happened?
So I want to make sure I hear the question. What can we do as members of news media, or what can we do as just citizens of this country and of this world?
Both.
I think as journalists, it is our job, number one job, to hold power to account. Hold power to account. It's our job to, we're not supposed to be megaphones for police organizations or the presidential administration. We're not megaphones. We're supposed to report so that we can inform the public about what's going on. We need to be about that work. I don't need to hear these 2-hour-long briefings of the president being aired on TV every day. I don't even need to see George Floyd dying on loop every day on TV news shows. What I need for journalists to do is to report on the actual issues of what are the issues confronting our communities, whether that is a global health pandemic that is continuing to rise. At the same time, we have people being killed by police and other white people who think they have dominion over our Black bodies. Those are the stories that we need to tell. We need to talk about what these powerful people are doing while we're distracted by whatever new shiny thing that the news media is trying to talk to us about. We need to continue to look at and report on what's happening when we're not looking, when we're so busy with our heads down, just trying to stay alive. We need somebody watching our back and reporting on those issues. What can citizens do? Vote. You too are responsible for holding power to account. You need to vote. And you need to vote on the issues. You need to vote strategically. I hear all the time about, well, this candidate is just as bad or not as, not there. This candidate has flaws too. Our ancestors knew better. They knew how to be strategic. That's what we need to learn. We need to reflect back on history and let history inform our choices today about how to be more strategic. One political candidate may not be our perfect candidate, but I guarantee you that one political candidate is better than the other. And I'm not saying which one. I'm not even telling you who to vote for. What I am saying is people have the responsibility to go out and inform themselves and educate themselves so that they can make intelligent decisions about how they want their lives to be governed and to hold power to account. That is not a journalist's job alone. That is our jobs as citizens.
Mic drop. Very well said. Thank you so much, Tracie. I really appreciate your time, and for sharing your experience as well, and your passion for journalism. Where can people go to find out more about Borealis Philanthropy or about the Reg Fund?
Sure. So go to Google and type in Racial Equity and Journalism Fund, and you'll see my face pop up, and you can click on any of those links. Borealis Philanthropy, you see it spelled out, or maybe you don't see it spelled out on the screen, but B as in boy, OREALIS Philanthropy. And it'll take you also to the Racial Equity and Journalism Fund.
Got you. And this is a .org, correct?
.org, yes.
So you mean that guy?
Yeah, that guy right there. And thank you so much for throwing it up there. And you can also learn a lot more about our current grant partners. So journalism organizations out there, if you're interested in applying and receiving funding from the Reg Fund, please go there and you can see some of the work that's being done by our grant partners. In February, we released $2.3 million this year so far to news organizations. So go to that site, go to the Reg page, and you can learn more about those grantees.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Tracie, for your time. We really appreciate you.
Thank you, Melissa. I appreciate it.
No problem. And ladies and gentlemen, make sure you continue to stick around here for Florida National News because the programming continues this evening. The evening news rundown will be back. And of course, the Entertainment 4 for 4 will be on today. So I know you guys like to look forward to that. So be sure to stick around at Florida National News here on Facebook for that. And tomorrow's Friday. So you guys know it is the triple threat day, always packed with exciting things going on. So for tomorrow, Jen will be back, Jenny Rosario de Casiano with Entertainment Buzz. She'll be interviewing director and producer John Richardson at 1 p.m. Eastern time. And then the evening news rundown, of course, on Friday, that will be at 5 p.m. And since it is a Friday, 8 p.m., you'll be right back to see Casey Hudson with the FNN Sports Take at 8 p.m. all times, our Eastern Standard Time. And of course, we simulcast on Facebook and YouTube. So one more time, if you haven't already, be sure to like us on Facebook. You'll find us at Florida National News, at FNN News TV, or at FNN News Live. And if you haven't subscribed yet on YouTube, be sure to subscribe. We are at FNN Florida National News over there. Be sure to click the little icon to make sure you don't miss anything. Click the little bell to get all of our shows in one place. All right. Well, thank you for tuning in to this edition of FNN Politics and Power. We will be back next Tuesday and Thursday. So have a great rest of your day so far. All right. Take care.